Okay, calm down.
Muhammad Hamor was one of 4 contributors to the Electronic Intifada who have been murdered by Israel in this genocide. I hate to say so far, but until it stops, nobody is safe. And there, of course, Hud al-Susi, Ra'ad Qaddura, Muhammad, and Refaat, and Ahmed Abu Artema, who is another very prominent figure in Gaza, a poet, a writer, a very frequent contributor to the Electronic Intifada, and most prominently one of the organizers of the Great March of Return, the 2018 mass nonviolent movement, which brought tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to protest the siege, and Israel responded by shooting them with snipers, murdering and maiming thousands of unarmed people.
Children, journalists, medics.
Yeah. Sorry?
I was just saying children, journalists, medics.
As usual for Israel. But Ahmed Abu Artema survived at the end of October, survived an assassination attempt. His house was targeted and bombed. He survived. He was injured. His 13-year-old son, Abdullah, was killed, along with other members of his family. Ahmed's other 2 children were also injured and, thank God, survived. But that just gives you a sense of the scale. I did a rough count. We currently, work with about 24 writers in Gaza on a regular basis. And we know of 4 who've been killed. I mean, it's just a horrifying scale of murder for the sake of murder, for the sake of revenge. And we're told this is Western values. We're told that Israel shares our values. Apparently, we do share Israel's values because the US is airlifting round the clock the bombs, the mortar shells, the missiles to do this. And Joe Biden could stop it with a phone call, could phone Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary. Today, they're saying, Biden is saying the indiscriminate bombing has to stop. Well, all Joe Biden has to do, if he meant that, is pick up the phone to the defense secretary and say, Mr. Secretary, stop the airlift of bombs to Israel. And the massacres would stop within minutes. That's what Ronald Reagan did. I mean, we're favorably comparing Ronald Reagan to Joe Biden. That's where this has gotten. But in 1982, when Israel was doing exactly the same as it's doing now to Gaza, but they were doing it to West Beirut. I was 10 years old at the time, but I remember it. Our whole lives are punctuated by Israel's massacres. Israel was just carpet bombing West Beirut. And even Ronald Reagan was horrified. And he picked up the phone to Menachem Begin, the Israeli prime minister at the time, and he said, Mr. Prime Minister, this is a Holocaust. It has to stop. Ronald Reagan said this is a Holocaust. And Begin replied, Mr. President, I think I know what a Holocaust is. Your eye roll is correct there, Katie. But then, according to the witnesses, they hung up the phone, and 20 minutes later, Menachem Begin called President Reagan back, and he said, Mr. President, I told Ariel Sharon, the defense minister, to stop the bombing. Joe Biden could do that now. Don't believe anyone who tells you, it's complicated. And, all these hand-wringing stories in the Washington Post and the New York Times about, behind the scenes, the Biden administration is trying to convince Israel to protect civilians and to be more precise and all this. It's all bullshit. If they really wanted to stop this, all they have to do is say to Israel, stop it. And Israel would stop it because Israel cannot do this without the round-the-clock airlift. They'd run out of bombs in 3 days.
An IDF Major General, retired Major Yitzhak Brick said, all of our missiles, the ammunition, the airplanes, it's all from the U.S. The minute they turn off the tap, you can't keep fighting. You have no capability. We can't fight this war without the United States, period.
Yeah, that's the truth. People need to know this, Katie, because all of this is just to fool people so that they'll vote for the Democrats. oh, look how upset Joe Biden is about what Netanyahu is doing. It's just window dressing. It's just to fool people, because Biden wouldn't even have to say a word publicly. All he'd have to do is pick up the phone in the Oval Office and say, "Stop the massacre," and it would stop.
Yeah, but then Ali, now comes the chorus of people telling you, it's often white men who will tell someone like you, "So you want Trump?"
I mean, Katie, look, that's not my problem. This is the worst case scenario for us. There is no worst case scenario than genocide. You can't threaten any of us with Donald Trump.
I wasn't doing that, obviously. I was
No, I
channeling
know.
that. Yeah,
I'm saying that to the
right.
people who say,
Yeah.
it's like, you can't threaten me with Donald
Right.
Trump, because this is the worst case scenario for us. Doesn't get worse than this. There's almost more criticism of Israel these days coming from certain segments of the right than from the Democratic Party. I'm not talking about the base of the Democratic
Right.
Party, because 80% of Democratic voters want a ceasefire. 57% of Republicans want a ceasefire.
So
It's I've never seen that in my lifetime. In more than 30 years, I've never seen that. That's how much the political class in this country is just completely detached from the people, from morality, from basic humanity and decency, and attached to just psychopathic constant war. I mean, let's just start in 2021. Let's not even go back the hundreds of years, because the US has never not been at war, either against the indigenous people of this continent or the rest of the world. But they left Afghanistan in defeat, in humiliation, in August of, that was 2021, right? And the helicopters and the horrifying scenes of people falling off the airplanes, and people comparing it to Vietnam and saying, this is the worst defeat since Vietnam. After 20 years of lying, then they immediately went into the proxy war in Ukraine. We don't have time to go into all the background, but that war was completely unnecessary. The United States provoked it. I entirely agree with John Mearsheimer on this. And then they lost that. There's a story in the New York Times yesterday, I tweeted about it, about how the big Ukrainian counteroffensive has failed, and now the US and Ukraine are trying to figure out how to do another offensive in a few months' time, when now the average age of soldiers in the Ukrainian military is over 40. And in some units, it's over 50, because they killed all the young men. They've exhausted all the young men. They've killed Ukraine in the name of saving it. And then they do this. Then they support this genocide. And Israel has failed militarily. The great Israeli army was defeated on October 7th. Again, the lies about mass rapes, the lies about atrocity, this is all to distract people from the fact that the resistance in Gaza defeated the vaunted Israeli army. They routed and humiliated the Gaza division, and they continue to do that. I keep saying, if it comes to massacring babies and children and elderly people and destroying schools and hospitals and infrastructure, Israel is by far the world champion. No one in the world beats Israel. But when it comes to fighting, dedicated warriors, resistance fighters, defending their land, defending their communities, defending their homes, Israel is taking a beating. The myth of the Israeli army has been totally destroyed. They've been on the ground in Gaza now more than 50 days. They have achieved nothing militarily. All they're doing is rounding up civilians from shelters and subjecting them to disgusting, humiliating treatment, photo ops, the kind of things the Nazis did. I mean, you see these photos, it's like the Nazis, what they did. Blindfolding men, stripping them naked, school teachers, journalists, doctors, nurses, just young men who have nothing to do with anything, and humiliating them so that this defeated, cowardly, child-murdering army can get some pictures to show the psychopathic public back home, look how we're humiliating them, look how we're winning. But they can't even stop the rockets coming out of Gaza. The bigger picture here is the Americans, the United States, keeps pushing its proxies into these catastrophes and has no capacity to learn, none whatsoever. So the failure of Afghanistan, then they launch into the failure of Ukraine, and now they launch into the failure of Israel's war on Gaza, which will not destroy Hamas, will not break Palestinians, but it will destroy millions of lives. And I'm not sure what good comes out of that for anyone, including Israel. I don't give a shit about Israel's well-being. I'm not one of these liberal Zionists who says, oh, well, this is bad for Israel. Well, that's the only silver lining, actually, that it's bad for Israel. I'm sorry. I go between just like anger and, this is my mood cycle. So you're seeing it all live. I will stop.
Yeah. No, but what you were saying, why would they want to do this? Isn't this because they want to thin out the population of Gaza?
To expel them, or as Giora Eiland, the former head of General Giora Eiland, the former head of Israel's National Security Council, said on Israeli TV, we're rolling out Nakba 2.0. I mean, they don't hide it. They don't hide it. It's like the media here is pretending, oh, well, I mean, are we sure? I mean, we don't know that they're doing all this stuff deliberately. But in Hebrew, on the Israeli, they say openly, they celebrate. Giora Eiland, this general, respected general in Israel, he's on every talk show. He's like the David Petraeus of Israel or something. Just an utter psychopathic failure, but is considered this like great figure. And Giora Eiland wrote an op-ed, he writes for one of the big Israeli papers, saying, oh, the World Health Organization is warning that if we don't let fuel and medicine and aid into Gaza, there'll be epidemics. He said we shouldn't be scared of epidemics. Epidemics help us.
Right. It would be a good
This
thing,
is barbarism.